a large orange disc, perfectly circular, very orange and glowing. It just moved at that kind of rate right over my head.
Shortly afterwards, it just accelerated ahead of me. I mean, just extraordinary speed.
Her first comment was to look at me and say, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, I think we just saw a flying saucer."
All of the religions are to base themselves on the reality that we are alone.
We have not been hiding anything.
I had the evidence that a crash did happen here.
We believe at this point that this should be given the highest classification NATO has. At that time was and still is cosmic top secret.
Unidentified flying objects.
Is it
artificial? Is it a product of intelligence? Scientifically, we eliminate the simple hypothesis. It's not a plane. It's not a helicopter. It's not a natural phenomenon because the descriptions don't match. Therefore, this global phenomenon resists any other explanation. And the only other remaining hypothesis is the hypothesis of extraterrestrial origin.
In 1609, Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei, with the help of his newly invented telescope, discovered 4 satellites orbiting the planet Jupiter. He deduced that the Earth revolved around the Sun, and thus was not the center of the universe. In 1633, he was imprisoned and threatened with torture. His discoveries challenged the establishment and its stability. For the past 50 years, there have been allegations that governments have withheld information on the subject of UFOs. These days, the threat of torture has been replaced by ridicule.
I mean, I used to work for the government, so I know that, there are a lot of things that you cannot tell common man because it's not within his realm to really understand what the big picture is.
I think people have a right to know about it, but I'm not really sure that I believe.
Ich glaube nicht, kann ich mir nicht vorstellen. Also in der heutigen Zeit mit der Kommunikation, Presse und sowas, kann ich mir nicht vorstellen, dass ich das wirklich auf Dauer geheim halten lassen würde.
The UFO issue made the headlines on June 25, 1947, when Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, reported seeing 9 bright saucer-like objects flying at incredible speed near Mount Rainier. He described the objects flying like a saucer being skipped over water. It was then that the term flying saucer was coined. During the next 2 weeks, over 1,000 sightings were reported throughout the country. In the summer of 1947, the 509th Bomb Group was the only squadron in the world entrusted with atomic weapons. The Enola Gay, infamous for dropping the atomic bomb over Hiroshima, Japan, was based here. On July 7, 1947, this elite squadron announced the recovery of a flying disc on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Major Jesse Marcel, intelligence officer for the 509th Squadron, was among the first military personnel to arrive on the scene.
I was amazed as to what I saw. the amount of debris that was scattered over such an area. But the more I saw the fragments, the more I realized that it wasn't anything that I was acquainted with. In fact, as it turned out, nobody else was acquainted with it.
There was foil no thicker than that in a pack of cigarettes, which was virtually indestructible, and pieces of I-beam with hieroglyphic-like markings that could not be read. Major Marcel took his report back to Roewell Army Airfield, along with bits of the wreckage. Colonel William Blanchard, commanding officer of the 509th, examined them both. He ordered Public Information Officer Walter Haut to release word that the Roewell Army Airfield had recovered a flying disc. He then ordered Major Marcel to fly the wreckage to Wright Field in Ohio. En route, the plane was to stop at headquarters of the 8th Army Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas. Major Marcel was met at Fort Worth by General Roger Ramey, commanding officer of the 8th Air Force at Fort Worth Army Airfield. According to Marcel, General Ramey told him not to say anything to the waiting press. He then switched the debris Marcel had brought from New Mexico with a radar reflector and pieces of a conventional weather balloon. With the material in place, General Ramey then held a press conference. The Roewell Army Airfield was squeezed out by senior personnel and the record was sealed.
If it was something of ours, I'm sure there would be no reason to keep it under cover that long. If it's an alien spacecraft, there's another reason why it would not never been owned by anybody here until they found out more about it.
His son, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., remembers the night his father came home with the crashed debris.
People say, well, that's a radar target. Well, he had radar training, and he knew what a radar target looked like. And he would not have brought a radar target, out of his way and wake my mother and myself up just to look at a piece of a radar target. We boxed the stuff back up, put it in the car, and took off for the base. And I didn't see him for a while. It was maybe later that afternoon, maybe it was the next day. And I guess that was the time that he flew to Fort Worth with it. And when he came back, he was very adamant that my mother and myself were never to discuss this, that treated it like a non-event because it didn't happen.
300 people now, at the latest count, have come forward with vivid, first-hand testimony of the Roewell event.
The recovery of the object in the desert of New Mexico and the large number of sightings by civilian and military personnel drove the United States government to investigate. Retired Air Force Colonel Wendell Stevens was part of a project gathering data on aerial phenomena over the Arctic Circle using B-29 aircraft in the late 1940s.
My job was to supervise that team from my old Air Materiel Command headquarters in the installation and removal of this special equipment. The equipment that we put aboard included video cameras, surge detectors on all of the electrical systems, and there's 4 or 5 and a B-29, magnetic detectors, radio frequency emission scanners, and a number of things to look for unidentified aerial phenomena. There were some very interesting reports that I heard from those crews of events that they recorded. But we were never allowed to read the tapes, develop the film, do any of those things there. It was all packed in a metal box and couriered to Washington each time an event took place. And so my curiosity was piqued by the secrecy.
The U.S. Air Force's investigatory program was officially launched on January 2, 1948, under the code name of Project Sign. From the 243 cases studied, a report entitled An Estimate of the Situation was compiled by the Air Technical Intelligence Center. It concluded, flying saucers are probably real extraterrestrial spacecraft. Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg found these conclusions unacceptable. He then ordered the Air Force to go out and find more earthly explanations. Project Sign then metamorphosed into Project Grudge. 244 cases were studied. It concluded, most reports of unidentified flying objects have been the result of persons failing to identify familiar phenomena such as reflections from bright surfaces in the day or lights in a night sky. In 1952, it finally became known as Project Blue Book. By now, the information gathered was being divided. That which was difficult to disprove disappeared, while sightings easily dismissed were made public. On February 28, 1960, the first director of the CIA, Roscoe H. Hillenkotter, broke his silence in a statement published in the New York Times.
He declared, "It is time for the truth to be brought out in open congressional hearings. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense." He charged that to hide the facts, the Air Force has silenced its personnel through the issuance of a regulation.
This was a secret time. America was obsessed with anti-communist sentiment, and there was great paranoia.
On the brutal face of communism, Union Square in New York was the backdrop for these scenes of red violence. From their ranks will come the saboteurs, spies, and subversives should World War III be forced upon America.
In addition to this, Orson Welles had demonstrated 20 years earlier just how gullible Americans were and how easily the public stampeded with fatal results.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
It wasn't only America. In Europe, the military presence was under the direction of NATO SHAPE. SHAPE was tracking a large number of UFOs on radar flying at high altitudes and great speeds over Central Europe and disappearing to the north. Their activities generated concern among military commanders as a possible threat from Russia. However, repeated demonstrations of advanced technology by these objects made it very clear to military authorities that these capabilities were far beyond anything that we or the Soviets had. At that point, SHAPE headquarters launched a 3-year investigation to determine what these objects were. Their conclusions are still classified today. Robert Dean, former intelligence analyst at SHAPE, claims to have seen the report at NATO headquarters during the early 1960s. It was entitled An Assessment.
After all the material had been collected, they brought it together and they wrote the final report with all of the appendices and annexes. Then, at that time, they made a determination and a recommendation to General Lemnitzer, the American four-star general that I worked for. And they suggested, this is so sensitive, this reality is so delicate, the conclusions that we have reached, we believe, could be essentially and substantially earth-shaking to the people unless they're prepared for it. We believe at this point that this should be given the highest classification NATO has, at that time was and still is, cosmic top secret.
Evidently, not everyone agreed. While still in Congress, Gerald Ford sent a letter to L. Mendel Rivers, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, on March 28, 1966.
I strongly recommend that there be a committee investigation of the UFO phenomena. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the greatest possible enlightenment on this subject.
In 1966, congressional hearings were held with Secretary of Defense Harold Brown and scientific advisor of Project Blue Book, Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
What is the Air Force hiding in this investigation? We have not been hiding anything. The investigations have been made public. The explanations of those where there is a clear explanation have been made public. The hearing this morning was public for just that reason.
None of the evidence that I have examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek is one of the most important figures in this matter. As a senior government representative, he faithfully continued to dismiss all UFO sightings as swamp gas, mass hallucinations, temperature inversions, and conventional aircraft until Blue Book was